Hello and welcome back to another video from TC Lit 2020. My name is Michael Tassone and today we're looking at the top 1 contextual readings of the poem Easter 1916 by W.B. Yeats. Before we begin, make sure to click the notifications bell so you know when our latest premium content is being delivered for your viewing pleasure. Easter 1916 by William Butler Yeats was written on the 25th of September 1916. Before being first published in 1920 in both London's Labour journal The New Statesman and New York's The Dial. The poem illustrates Yeats's response to the Easter Rising that occurred in 1916, in which Irish nationalists led a rebellion to win independence from British rule. Throughout the poem there is an evident change in genre, as well as the use of generic conventions and poetic devices. The piece is driven by a consistent AB-AB rhyme scheme, which adds a sense of flow throughout each of the 4 stanzas. Hence, when considering the context of the changing landscape of Ireland since the Easter Rising, as well as Yeats's ambivalence towards Irish nationalism, the poem can be interpreted as Yeats's grudging respect for the revolutionaries, as he acknowledges that Ireland's independence hasn't arisen the way he hoped it to. This is evident through the themes of nationalism and change throughout the poem. Yeats was an Irish poet who wrote the majority of his work during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He belonged to the Protestant Anglo-Irish minority, most of which considered themselves English people who happened to have been born in Ireland. Yet Yeats was, on the contrary, strongly invested in his Irish heritage, featuring Irish legends and heroes in many of his poems and plays. He was equally firm in adhering to his self-image as an artist, yet this led many to accuse him of elitism. Hence, he struggled to convince Irish people to conform to his vision for Irish independence, which was to gain it in a non-violent manner by establishing a culture built upon the arts. The Easter Rising, the subject of the poem, occurred on the 24th of April 1916, primarily in Dublin. The rebel leaders and their followers seized the city's general post office and other strategic locations. From the steps of the post office, Patrick Pearse, one of the uprising's leaders, read a proclamation declaring Ireland an independent republic and stated that a provisional government, comprised of IRB members, had been appointed. Despite the rebels' hopes, the public didn't rise to support them. The British government soon declared martial law in Ireland, and in less than a week, the rebels were crushed by the government's forces sent against them. Some 450 people were killed and more than 2,000 others, many of them civilians, were wounded in the violence, which also destroyed much of the Dublin city centre. Among Pearse, other leaders included Countess Markievicz, Thomas MacDonagh, and John McBride, all of which Yeats was acquainted to. Countess was a childhood friend of his from his days in County Sligo. MacDonagh and Pearse were teachers at St Enda's, where Yeats attended school, and McBride was the ex-husband of Maud Gonne, whom Yeats loved for most of, if not his entire life, only to be rejected numerous times. Now that the context of the poem has been established, let's dive into the poem itself. The poem reads as follows. I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces, from counter or desk among grey, 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head, or polite meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said, polite meaningless words, and thought before I had done, for mocking tale or a jibe, to please a companion around the fire at the club, being certain that they and I but lived where motley is worn, all changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. That woman's days were spent in ignorant goodwill, her nights in argument, until her voice grew shrill. What voice more sweet than hers, when young and beautiful, she rode to harriers? This man had kept a school, and rode our winged horse. This other, his helper and friend, was coming into his force. He might have won fame in the end, so sensitive his nature seemed, so daring and sweet his thought. This other man I had dreamed, a drunken, vainglorious lout. He had done most bitter wrong to some who are near my heart, yet I number him in the song. He too has resigned his part in the casual comedy. He too has changed in his turn, transformed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. Hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seen, enchanted to a stone to trouble that living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range, from cloud to tumbling in cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim, and a horse plashes within it. The long-legged moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. Minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? That is heaven's part, our part, to murmur name upon name, as a mother names her child, when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. What is it but nightfall? No, no, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith, for all that is done and said. We know their dream, enough to know they dreamed, and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse. MacDonough and McBride, and Connolly and Pearce, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. The first stanza depicts a persona's conversations with the revolutionaries prior to the Easter Rising, and how they relayed this to their mates in a joking manner, until after the event when the reality of what took place really hit home. The change in genre within this stanza of the poem draws emphasis to the immediate impact the Easter Rising had on Irish citizens. The persona would attempt to think of a mocking tale or a jibe as a way of making fun of the revolutionaries and their cause, and states that they lived where motley is worn, motley having connotations to jesters or fools, further demoralising the revolutionaries. Thus far, the genre of the poem can be seen as a comedy through the way the persona makes light of the situation at hand. However, there is a sudden break in rhythm when all changed utterly. Here we see the poem switch from comedy to tragedy, where the colon immediately breaks the rhythm to allow set emphasis to fall on changed. From there, a terrible beauty is born. The oxymoron establishes the significance of the Easter Rising and which it had on Ireland. The beauty links to the idea that independence for Ireland was getting nearer, while the terrible links to the idea that using violence as a way of getting independence was the polar opposite of what Yeats's vision for Ireland was, as mentioned previously. In the second stanza, Yeats narrows his focus from the atmospheric change to how specific people have changed due to revolutionary zeal. The people described draw many parallels to the leaders whom Yeats knew who are mentioned previously. This other is Thomas MacDonough, the teacher at St Enda's where Yeats attended school. He was one of the executed leaders of the Easter Rising. MacDonough is described as coming into his force. This alludes to Yeats's belief that at the time of his death he was coming into his best work as a poet, suggesting that Yeats thought MacDonough was better off as a writer rather than joining the violent cause for the sake of his country. This other man is John McBride, another executed leader of the Easter Rising. Yeats's description of McBride reinforces the change from comedy to tragedy within the poem, where he too has resigned his part in the casual comedy. He too has been changed in his turn. Once again, a semicolon breaks the rhythm to emphasise this change, leading to the refrain of the oxymoron, a terrible beauty is born, which concludes the second stanza. In the third stanza, we see a change from realism to symbolism in the poem, as Yeats looks to contrast the natural environment with the people of Ireland. Yeats depicts the horse that comes from the road, the birds that range to tumbling cloud, moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. The peaceful description adds a tranquil tone to the stanza, contrary to the melancholy tone of the previous two stanzas. He emphasises that minute by minute they change. The semicolon again breaks the rhythm to emphasise that the natural world is ever-changing, regardless of human influence. This is furthered by Yeats's use of chiasmus, where 2 lines later he writes that nature changes minute by minute. The sense of change is contrasted with the metaphor of the stone in the midst of it all. The stone is surrounded by change yet yearns to remain the same. Yeats draws a parallel between the stone and the people of Ireland due to their ignorance of Yeats's vision, which promoted a changing culture. However, the stone also serves as a polysemic image in that it can also be interpreted as a metaphor for the aforementioned leaders and how they joined the revolutionary cause instead of buying into Yeats's romanticised vision. All in all, by contrasting the metaphor with the natural world, he implies that whilst in the short term change isn't visible, change will eventually be brought about by the natural world. Finally, the fourth stanza illustrates Yeats' conclusion on the significance of the Easter Rising. This is conducted through rhetorical questions and reforming key elements from each of the previous three stanzas. The stanza begins with, "Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart." The stone metaphor from the previous stanza has been recycled to communicate how people give up too much of their lives to pursue unchanging goals and may lose their ordinary human feelings and hence become unresponsive to change. This specifically draws connections to the leaders Yeats was acquainted with, in the sense that he's questioning how much passion is too much before they disengage with the world around them. Yeats questions, was it needless death after all? The rhetorical question reinforces Yeats's ambivalence towards nationalism by questioning whether it was all done for nothing. Yeats goes on to conclude with, "MacDonagh and McBride, Connolly and Pearce, wherever green is worn, a terrible beauty is born." He names the four executed leaders, a change from the previous generalisations used in the second stanza. After being addressed as fools in the first stanza, they are now remembered through the obituary of the colour green, Ireland's national colour. The oxymoron is now read under the influence of Yeats's grudging respect for the revolutionaries, as he finally understands what they did for their country's cause for independence. They go from fools to agents of change, and Yeats's grudging respect for the revolutionaries finally becomes apparent. So why is any of this significant, you may ask? Well, the contextual reading of this poem is significant because so much of the poem alludes to the Easter Rising. By contextualising the poem, a more personal response from Yeats arises as it presents Yeats's own thoughts on the issue. We understand Yeats's ambivalence towards nationalism and his willingness to accept the event as contributing to the cause for Irish independence. Yes, he questions whether Home Rule may have been passed even if the Rising didn't happen, but ultimately he hails the leaders, particularly those he's acquainted with, as martyrs to the cause. On a global scale, it calls readers to accept that change will happen, and it's important that we move with the change throughout life. So that just about wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it allows you also to become fanatics for Yeats's poetry. Before you go, there's 3 things I want you to do. 1. Don't forget to smash that like button. If this video gets 13 likes, I'll give away 13 rolls of toilet paper to help keep you and your family clean and healthy. 2. Comment down below as to what we should do next. We love hearing from you guys. And finally, of course, if you haven't already, subscribe for more lit content. I'll see you guys in the next one.